Angry with my husband for his infidelity, I was packing a suitcase when I overheard a conversation that gave me control of $5.5 million. In that moment, my world split in two: the before, where I was an invisible woman, and the after, where I would discover my true power. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. And if you, for a second, feel like this sounds familiar, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me to keep unburdening myself. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 62 years old and I lived, in a 3-story historic house in the South of Broad neighborhood of Charleston, South Carolina. A house I inherited from my mother, with its hand-painted tiles in the kitchen, its centuries-old heart pine beams, and the courtyard where my grandmother grew her red geraniums. A house that, until that October morning, I believed I would share with my husband, Arthur, until the last of my days. I had been married for 38 years. 38 years of waking up before dawn to prepare his coffee with a dash of cinnamon, exactly how he liked it. 38 years of pressing his crisp, white cotton shirts, folding them with the care of someone who loves every wrinkle she smooths. 38 years of being the perfect wife to a man who, as I would discover that morning, saw me as a walking inconvenience. The alarm clock read 5:30 a.m. when I began my usual routine. My hands, already marked with age spots but still steady, prepared breakfast: grits, bacon, scrambled eggs, and homemade biscuits. The aroma of freshly ground coffee mingled with the smell of baking flour, creating that morning symphony that had perfumed our kitchen for decades. Arthur came downstairs at 6:45 like every other day. His hair, once jet black, now silver at the temples, was perfectly combed back. His mustache, which I had fallen in love with when we were young, now seemed like a cold line above lips that no longer smiled at me. He was wearing his gray Oxford suit, the same one he wore for his important meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays. "Good morning, dear," I said, pouring his coffee into the blue mug I gave him for our 10th anniversary. He didn't even look up from the newspaper. He murmured, turning the pages with a dry rustle that sounded like breaking bones. During breakfast, I tried to make conversation. I asked about his meeting with the investors from Savannah, about whether he needed me to prepare anything special for lunch. His answers were monosyllables wrapped in sighs of annoyance. It was like talking to a wall that ignored me with the cruelty of someone who considers your voice to be background noise. At 7:30, he rose from the table, leaving his plate half-eaten. Without a kiss, without a "thank you for breakfast," without even looking at me. Just the sound of his Oxford shoes against the tile floor, walking away towards his office on the top floor. I collected the plates with trembling hands. It wasn't the first time he'd treated me as if I were invisible, but that morning, something inside me shattered like fine china. Maybe it was the way he crumpled his linen napkin and let it fall to the floor, knowing I would pick it up. Maybe it was the contempt in his silence, more hurtful than any shout. I went up to our bedroom with slow steps, each stair creaking under my feet, as if the house itself were crying with me. The room smelled of his aftershave, a scent that once calmed me and now suffocated me. The yellow silk curtains we chose together on our honeymoon in New Orleans now looked like shrouds hanging from the windows. I sat on the edge of the bed, on the embroidered quilt my Aunt Hope had made as a wedding gift. My fingers traced the golden threads of the yellow roses, the flowers that represent friendship and joy in our traditions. What a bitter irony. Just then, something snapped me out of my melancholy. Voices. They were coming from Arthur's office down the hall. He was talking to someone, but his tone was different. It wasn't the apathetic grunt he used with me. It was warm, intimate. "The old lady doesn't suspect a thing," I heard him say. "She eats right out of my hand. I'll tell her I'm going on a work retreat. You get ready for that weekend in Asheville." My heart stopped. I stood up slowly, my sheepskin slippers silent against the hardwood floor. Each step towards the office was an eternity. A woman's voice answered on the other end of the phone line, a young, crystalline voice full of life. Everything I no longer was. "And what if she finds out?" she asked with a laugh that cut through me like a knife. "Find out what? That she's useless. A burden. That she doesn't even notice when I swap her pills for vitamins." The words fell on me like stones. I leaned against the hallway wall, my legs trembling, my breath catching in my throat. My pills? The ones I took for my blood pressure, for my heart, for my arthritis? Vitamins? Oh, baby, the woman laughed. You're terrible. But I can't take it anymore. I want you to introduce me as your wife, not your assistant. Patience, Valerie. All in good time. First, I need her to sign some papers. The notary has everything ready. Once I have her signature, the rest will be easy. My entire body turned to ice. I stood there, pressed against the wall, listening to the man with whom I had shared nearly 4 decades of my life plan my destruction. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was poisoning me. He was robbing me. He was erasing me from my own existence. I managed to make it back to the bedroom, but I was no longer the same woman who had left it 5 minutes earlier. I was someone else. Someone who had just woken up from a 38-year dream to discover it had been a nightmare. I opened the closet with hands that no longer shook. I pulled out my brown leather suitcase, the same one I used on our honeymoon, and started to pack. Every piece of clothing I folded was a goodbye. Every pair of shoes, a promise never to return. My navy blue dress, the one he said looked good on me. My cashmere shawl, a gift from my mother. The pearl earrings he gave me on our 20th anniversary. But as I packed, I kept listening, and what I heard next would change everything. And the stock certificates? Valerie asked. They're in the safe, as always. She doesn't even know the combination. She doesn't even know they exist. Stocks. A safe. My heart began to beat in a different way. It wasn't fear. It was something more dangerous. It was curiosity. That afternoon, I sat in the living room, pretending to do needlepoint while I processed what I had heard. My fingers moved mechanically over the altar cloth I was making for St. John the Baptist Cathedral, but my mind was elsewhere, unraveling 38 years of lies as if it were a tangled ball of yarn. I remembered when Arthur came into my life. I was 24 and working at the Charleston Library Society. He was a public accountant, a recent graduate from the University of South Carolina, with cheap but well-pressed suits and a smile that lit up the entire historic district. He courted me for 6 months with yellow roses, serenading me with his guitar on my porch and promises written in letters that I treasured in a sweetgrass basket. "We'll be a team, Eleanor," he would say, holding my hands, calloused from the books. "You have the wisdom. I have the ambition. Together, we'll build an empire." And what a fool I was to believe him. When we married at St. Michael's Church, I had saved $20,000 from my salary at the library. It was a fortune for a middle-class girl in 1985. Arthur had nothing but student debt and dreams of grandeur. "Invest in me, my love," he asked on our wedding night, as I counted bills on our marital bed. "Soon, we'll be rich." I gave him everything. Every last dollar. With my money, he set up his first accounting office in a rented space in North Charleston. With my money, he bought his first fine suits, his first electric calculator, the wooden furniture that would make him look successful to clients. I left my job at the library to be the unpaid secretary of his growing firm. I answered phones, filed documents, and handled the basic bookkeeping he considered women's work. The first 5 years were a constant sacrifice. We lived in a cramped apartment in a rundown building where the bathroom was shared and the walls were so thin we could hear our neighbors' arguments as if they were in our living room. I cooked on a 2-burner hot plate, washed our clothes by hand in the common courtyard, and stretched every dollar like chewing gum to make it to the end of the month. While I lived like I was poor, Arthur began to dress like he was rich. "It's for the business image," he'd explain every time he came home with a new suit, Italian shoes, or an expensive watch. "Clients need to trust that I handle money well. If they see me as a failure, they won't give me their accounts." I wore the same black dress to his work's social events. The same dress for 3 years. His partners' wives would look at me with pity, whispering among themselves about Arthur's poor thing, who had married a woman with no class. When we finally moved into the Charleston house, the house I inherited when my mother died of pancreatic cancer, Arthur took possession of it like a conqueror. He replaced my grandmother's antique furniture with modern glass and steel. He ripped out the courtyard plants to install a more elegant fountain. He turned my mother's sewing room into his personal office, where no one else was allowed to enter. "This house needs to be updated," he'd say while directing the workers who were tearing down centuries of family history. "We can't live like we're in some historical reenactment." I protested once. Only once. I told him I wanted to at least keep the original kitchen with its hand-painted tiles. He looked at me with that expression that would later become so familiar. Pure contempt. As if I were a cockroach he had just found in his coffee. "You don't understand aesthetics," he said. "That's why you still look like the hired help instead of the wife of a successful businessman." From that day on, I stopped having an opinion about my own house. The following years were a blur of small humiliations that piled up like grains of sand until they formed a mountain of pain. Arthur prospered. His accounting office grew into a financial consulting firm with offices on Daniel Island. He began to handle the accounts of developers, real estate magnates, and minor politicians. His name appeared in the society pages of the newspapers, always accompanied by young, elegant women he introduced as associates or strategic partners. I became a ghost in my own life. At business dinners, I would sit in silence while he told jokes with powerful men and flirted shamelessly with their wives. If I tried to join the conversation, he would cut me off with an "Eleanor doesn't understand these things," and change the subject. At home, we developed separate routines. He came home later and later, always with excuses about late meetings and work dinners. I ate alone in the kitchen, watching soap operas on a small television, while he had dinner in his office reviewing important documents he never let me see. When I turned 40, he gave me a blender. "So you can make better smoothies," he said without looking up from his papers. I had spent hours staring at a silver bracelet in the window at Nordstrom that cost the same as what he spent on a single dinner with clients. I never mentioned it to him. What for? At 45, I started getting sick. First, it was high blood pressure. Then, minor heart problems. Then, arthritis in my hands from so many years of domestic work. Arthur hired a young woman, Carmen, to come 3 times a week to clean the house. "I don't want you to die and leave everything dirty for me," he joked. But I knew it wasn't a joke. The medications Dr. Ramirez prescribed were expensive. Arthur paid for them without complaint, but always with cutting remarks. "Another pill? You're like a walking pharmacy." Every bottle that arrived at the house was accompanied by a sigh of resignation, as if my health were an unacceptable financial burden. Now I understood why I never got better. Why, after 2 years of taking medication, my blood pressure was still high, my heart was still irregular, my joints still ached. They weren't medications. They were vitamins. Arthur was slowly poisoning me with my own hope for a cure. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Daniel, my son, calling from London where he worked as an engineer for a British company. "Hi, Mom." He greeted me with that tired voice he had developed since he left the States. "How are you?" "I'm fine, sweetie. How's everything over there?" "Mom, I need to talk to you about something serious." His tone changed, becoming formal, distant. "I've been talking to Dad about your situation." "My situation?" "Your health, Mom. Dad tells me you've been very forgetful, that you're forgetting things, that sometimes you don't recognize people. I'm worried." I felt as if I'd been slapped. "Daniel, I'm perfectly fine. I don't know what your father is talking about." "Mom, it's not your fault. It's normal at your age. But Dad and I think you need professional help. Maybe a place where they can take better care of you." A place? A nursing home. My own son, the child I carried for 9 months, who I nursed until he was 2, who I held when he had nightmares, who I applauded at every school play, wanted to put me in a home as if I were a nuisance. "Daniel, I don't know what your father has told you, but Mom, it's for your own good. Dad showed me some documents you signed incorrectly, checks you filled out with the wrong numbers. You're sick, and you don't want to accept it." I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. My hands were trembling not with fear, but with a rage I had never felt before. Not only had Arthur been poisoning me, he had also been manipulating our son, planting seeds of doubt about my sanity, preparing the ground so that when the time came to get rid of me, Daniel would be his unwitting accomplice. I got up from the armchair and walked to the office. The door was locked, but I knew every inch of this house. I knew Arthur kept a spare key to the office in the ceramic vase in the hallway. the same vase he had tried to throw away years ago, but that I had hidden until he forgot about it. The door opened with a soft click. The office smelled of expensive cigars and expensive cologne. Everything in it was masculine, modern, alien to the house's history. In the right corner was the black, imported safe with a digital combination. Next to it, on the glass desk, were scattered documents. I looked through them with trembling hands. They were contracts for a company called Coastal Valley Real Estate Development, construction company stocks, titles to properties in Savannah, Hilton Head, Naples, places we had never been to together, properties worth millions and millions of dollars. And on every document, my signature, perfectly forged. My husband hadn't just been stealing my health, he had been stealing my entire life. Over the next few days, I lived in a waking nightmare. Every one of Arthur's gestures had become transparent, as if I had developed X-ray vision. When he served me breakfast with that fake smile, I saw the lies seeping through his teeth, yellowed from cigars. When he asked, "How are you feeling, dear?" I heard the echo of his voice telling Valerie I was a useless burden. But the big betrayals weren't the worst part. The worst were the small daily cruelties that I now understood for what they truly were. A psychological torture designed to drive me genuinely insane, like when he would accidentally knock over my coffee cup onto my needlepoint. "Oh, sorry, Eleanor. How clumsy of me," he'd say as I watched months of work get ruined by brown stains that would never come out. Then he'd buy me another cup, smaller, uglier, as if that compensated for the deliberate destruction of something I loved. Or when visitors came over and he'd introduce me as my wife Eleanor, who's not quite herself anymore. The guests would look at me with that expression of pity reserved for the mentally ill, while I smiled and offered canapes, dying inside every time he added, "The doctor says it's normal for her age, poor thing." The last straw was on Tuesday when my dear friend Rose came to visit. Rose had been my friend since high school, the only person who still treated me like the old Eleanor, not the shadow I had become. We were drinking chamomile tea in the courtyard when Arthur appeared, interrupting our conversation as he always did whenever I had a moment of happiness. "Rose, how wonderful to see you," he said with that charming smile he reserved for guests. "I wish you could come by more often. Eleanor needs company from people her own age. You know how it is with the years." Rose looked at me, puzzled. "The years? But Eleanor is perfectly fine. In fact, she seems sharper than many women of 40. Oh, Rose, you're always so kind." Arthur sighed, placing his hand on my shoulder with a pressure that seemed affectionate, but felt like a vulture's talons to me. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't worried. Yesterday, she forgot to turn off the gas stove. Last week, she got lost on her way to the city market, a place she's been going to for 20 years. These are signs. I froze. I had never forgotten to turn off the stove. I had never gotten lost. But Rose looked at me with those eyes full of concern that confirmed Arthur's lies were working. "Is that true, Eleanor?" I couldn't answer. The words were stuck in my throat like stones. Arthur seized my silence to continue building his narrative of a senile wife. "Dr. Hernandez recommended a very good place in Mount Pleasant. A specialized center where they could take better care of her than I can. It's not that I want to get rid of her, Rose. But sometimes true love means doing the hardest thing." Rose left that afternoon convinced I was losing my mind. I watched her walk away down the cobblestone street, carrying the image of an Eleanor who needed to be institutionalized for her own good. My only friend turned into an unwitting accomplice to my future imprisonment. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen, in the same chair where I had eaten breakfast with Arthur for thousands of mornings, trying to remember when exactly my invisibility had begun. Was it gradual like aging, or was there a specific moment when I ceased to exist as a person and became just an obstacle? I remembered my last birthday, my 62nd. Arthur was in a very important meeting and couldn't join me for the mass I had said for my parents at St. John the Baptist Cathedral. I spent the day alone, as I spent most days. Carmen, the cleaning lady, brought me a small chocolate cake from the corner bakery. "Mrs. Vance," she said as she lit a makeshift candle, "you deserve so much better than this." I didn't understand what she meant then. I did now. The next day, while Arthur showered, singing a song he had never sung to me, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. Check our bank statements. The documents were kept in the office desk, in a folder labeled Household Expenses. But when I opened them, I found much more than utility bills. I found my financial death sentence, written in numbers and official stamps. Arthur had opened 3 bank accounts without my knowledge, all with my name as a co-owner, but with no access for me. In those accounts were million-dollar deposits. $5.5 million from the sale of properties we apparently owned together, but whose existence I had never been informed of. There were receipts from expensive restaurants where I had never eaten, charges from luxury hotels where I had never slept, purchases from jewelry stores where I had never set foot. Thousands and thousands of dollars spent on a parallel life Arthur was leading with another woman, financed with money that was legally also mine, but to which I never had access. The most devastating part was the monthly transfers to an account in the name of Valerie Morales, $2,500 every month for the last 2 years. The salary I never had, paid religiously to the woman who had replaced me in everything but name. There was more. Life insurance policies with Valerie as the beneficiary. Wills where I was listed as inheriting only personal belongings and household effects, while the properties, stocks, bank accounts, everything of real value would go into a trust controlled by Arthur and Valerie. But the document that completely broke me was a letter from Dr. Hernandez, the same doctor who had supposedly diagnosed me with cognitive decline. A letter addressed to Arthur explaining that the episodes of confusion and memory loss I had allegedly been having were normal for women my age, and that he recommended a psychiatric evaluation to determine if I was competent to manage my own financial affairs. I had never visited Dr. Hernandez. I had never had that evaluation. It was all a lie, but lies backed by medical, notarial, and legal documents. A plan orchestrated with surgical precision to strip me of everything and make me believe it was for my own good. I sat on the marble floor of the office and cried for the first time in years. Not the silent weeping I had perfected so as not to bother Arthur. I cried like a wounded animal, with sobs that came from my stomach and shook my entire body. I cried for the 38 lost years spent being the perfect wife to a man who despised me. I cried for my son who had been manipulated into believing his mother was crazy. I cried for my friend Rose who would now see me as a senile old woman. I cried for the 24-year-old Eleanor who fell in love with a lie and spent her entire life paying for that mistake. But most of all, I cried for the woman I had become. Invisible, disposable, an inconvenience to be eliminated with legal elegance so no one would feel guilty. When the tears ran out, something strange happened. The pain crystallized, hardened, and turned into something else. Into clarity, into purpose, into a cold fury I never knew I could feel. I got up from the floor, wiped the tears with the back of my hand, and for the first time in decades, I smiled a real smile. Arthur had made a fatal mistake. He had underestimated the invisible woman. He thought 38 years of submission had killed my spirit forever. He thought I would never get up from the floor where he had trampled me. He was wrong. The obedient, quiet Eleanor had died that night on the office floor. The person who stood up was someone different. A woman who had lost everything she thought was important, and therefore had nothing left to lose. And a woman with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous woman of all. The next day, while Arthur was getting ready for another of his work meetings, I dialed a number I found in the phone book. Martinez Law Firm. Good morning. Good morning. I need to speak with an attorney. It's urgent. What is the matter regarding, ma'am? For the first time in 38 years, my voice was firm when I replied, it's about getting my life back. Patricia Martinez, Esquire, turned out to be a woman in her mid-40s, with short hair and dark suits that inspired confidence. Her office in downtown Charleston smelled of fresh coffee and justice. When I finished telling her my story, she sat in silence for long minutes, reviewing the documents I had managed to photocopy in secret. Mrs. Vance, she finally said, taking off her glasses to look me straight in the eye. What you're describing is a conspiracy to commit financial fraud and systematic psychological abuse. But I need you to understand something. This is going to be a war. I'm already at war, Ms. Martinez. It's just that until now I was the only one who didn't know it. For the next 2 weeks, I pretended to be the same submissive Eleanor while Patricia and her team built my counterattack. I kept making Arthur's breakfasts. I kept taking his vitamins disguised as medicine. I kept smiling when he treated me like a mentally challenged child. But in the afternoons, when he left for his meetings, I met with Patricia to plan my legal resurrection. I learned that in South Carolina, marital property is divided equitably, meaning I had a right to a fair share of everything, regardless of whose name it was under. I learned that forging a spouse's signature is a federal crime. I learned that administering false medication constitutes aggravated domestic abuse. Your husband is smart, Patricia explained. But he got too confident. All these documents he forged, all these accounts he opened, everything is on record. On paper, we are stronger than him. The first move was subtle. Patricia filed a legal motion requesting access to all bank accounts registered in the name of Arthur Vance, or where Eleanor Vance appeared as a co-owner. She also requested a forensic analysis of the medications I was taking and an independent psychiatric exam to verify my mental capacity. Arthur received the legal notice on a Tuesday morning while eating breakfast. I saw the color drain from his face as if he had swallowed actual poison. His hands trembled so much he spilled coffee on the newspaper. "What is this, Eleanor?" he asked, showing me the official papers with the court seal. "I don't know, dear. They don't ask me about these things," I replied in the same old voice, the voice of the invisible woman he thought he knew. But something in my eyes must have alerted him, because he looked at me differently, as if he were truly seeing me for the first time in years. "Did you do this?" "Me? Arthur, please. You yourself say I'm not well in the head. How could I do something so complicated?" That afternoon I heard him on the phone, no longer with the warm voice he used for Valerie. Now he sounded desperate, like a cornered animal. "I don't know how she found out," he was saying to someone. "Someone is helping her. We need to speed everything up." On Friday, Daniel arrived from London, summoned urgently by his father. My son had grown into a young version of Arthur, successful, arrogant, and convinced that the women in the family were emotional burdens to be tolerated. The family meeting was held in the main dining room, the same one where we had celebrated so many Christmases pretending to be a happy family. Arthur sat at the head of the table, Daniel to his right, and I in the place I had always occupied, the farthest, the least important, the one that could be easily ignored. "Mom," Daniel began in that condescending tone he had learned from his father. "Dad told me what's happening. I understand you're confused, that maybe someone is manipulating you, but this has to stop." "What has to stop, sweetie?" "This business with the lawyers. These pointless lawsuits. Dad only wants to take care of you." Arthur nodded with the expression of a misunderstood martyr. "Eleanor, I know you're sick. It's not your fault. But we can't let unscrupulous people take advantage of your condition to get money." "My condition?" "Mom," Daniel intervened, pulling some papers from his briefcase. "I've been doing some research. I spoke with your lawyer. She's one of those vultures who specializes in manipulating vulnerable seniors. She's filling your head with fantasies to get money from the family." I felt like I had been slapped. My own son, defending the man who had been poisoning me for years. "Daniel," I said in a calm voice, "have I ever asked you for money?" "No, but have I ever asked you to take care of me?" "Mom, that's not the point. The point, my son, is that your father has lied to you so much that you can no longer tell the difference between reality and his stories." Arthur turned red with indignation. You see? You see how she is? She never used to talk to me like this. It's obvious someone is manipulating her." "You're right, Arthur. Someone manipulated me for 38 years. But that's over now." I got up from the table and walked to my room. I heard them whispering to each other, planning their next move like generals in a war where I was the disputed territory. That night, Daniel knocked on my bedroom door. He entered without waiting for an answer, as he always had since he was a child. "Mom, I want to talk to you. Woman to woman." "Woman to woman? Since when do you see me as a woman, Daniel?" "I've always just been your mom, the one who cooked your meals and washed your clothes." He sat on the edge of the bed, trying to use the same affectionate tone he used as a child when he wanted me to buy him something. "Mom, Dad showed me the documents. There's a lot of money involved. More than you could ever need." If you continue with this lawsuit, they'll end up taking everything. The lawyers will get it all. And what do you gain if I leave things as they are? Me? Nothing, Mom. I just want what's best for you. Liar. The word came out so dry, so blunt that Daniel flinched. Mom, you're in on this too, aren't you? Your father promised you something. What was it? A piece of the inheritance? Money for your flat in London? Mom, please. You're being paranoid. No one is conspiring against you. I took a folder from my nightstand that Patricia had given me. It contained copies of phone records between Arthur and Daniel for the last 6 months. Calls where they discussed my symptoms of mental decline, where they planned my institutionalization, where they decided how to divide my properties when the time came. Read this, I said, tossing the folder onto the bed. Daniel's face went pale as he recognized the transcripts of his own conversations. Mom, this looks worse than it is. Looks worse? Daniel, in here you're planning to put me in a home to take my money. How could it possibly look worse? You don't understand. Dad says you really are sick. That sometimes you don't recognize people. That you forget things. I just wanted to protect you from yourself. Protect me from myself by putting me in a home and stealing everything I own? It's not stealing. It's managing your assets until I die? The silence that followed was more revealing than any confession. Daniel couldn't meet my gaze. Get out of my room, I said. Mom, out. It was the first time in my life I had ever yelled at my son. Daniel stood up as if I had struck him and left the room without another word. The next morning, Arthur stopped pretending. He came into breakfast with the attitude of a man who has decided to take off his mask. Eleanor, we need to talk. Talk. You are going to drop this lawsuit. You are going to fire that lawyer. And you are going to sign the papers the notary prepared. Or what? Or I will have to take more drastic measures. Like what? Like having Dr. Hernandez officially certify that you are not mentally competent to handle your affairs. Like having you committed to the psychiatric center I've already arranged. Like proving that you are a senile old woman being manipulated by unscrupulous lawyers. He moved closer to me, and for the first time in 38 years, I felt a physical fear of my husband, but it was a different fear than before. Before, I was afraid of hurting him, of disappointing him, of not being enough. Now I was afraid because I knew exactly what he was capable of. You don't know me, Arthur, I said, standing up from the table. You think you know me because for 38 years I chose to be the woman you wanted me to be. But that woman is dead. And the one standing here now isn't afraid of anything, because she has nothing left to lose. That afternoon, Daniel returned to London without saying goodbye. Arthur disappeared for 3 days, and I was left alone in the house, feeling for the first time in decades that the silence was my ally, not my enemy. The war had officially begun. But now I knew that the invisible woman had an advantage they hadn't considered. For 38 years, I had been observing, learning, unknowingly preparing for this moment, and I was ready to fight. The first victory came 2 weeks later, when Patricia called me early in the morning, her voice triumphant. Mrs. Vance, the judge has just issued his ruling. All bank accounts have been frozen until the case is resolved. Your husband cannot move a single dollar without court authorization. Arthur found out when he tried to pay his bill at the golf club on Kiowa Island. His credit card was declined in front of his business friends, the same powerful men to whom he had always boasted of his financial success. The humiliation was so intense that he came home like a wounded bull bellowing from the doorway. Eleanor, what did you do? I was in the kitchen, preparing my first real meal in years. Not the vitamins disguised as medicine, but the actual medications the independent doctor had prescribed after confirming that Arthur had been slowly poisoning me. For the first time in 2 years, my blood pressure was normal. Do what, Arthur? The accounts are frozen. I can't withdraw a penny. You made me look like an idiot in front of my partners. I turned to look at him calmly, drying my hands on the apron that had belonged to my grandmother. Oh, what a shame. And how are you going to pay Valerie her $2,500 a month now? His face fell. He knew that I knew everything. Eleanor, we can handle this like civilized people. Like civilized people? Like when you were poisoning me for 2 years? Or like when you told my son I was crazy so you could have me committed? I never. Don't lie to me anymore. The shout came from the depths of my soul, with a force I didn't know I possessed. The lies are over. You're done treating me like an idiot. Arthur was paralyzed. He had never seen this version of me. For 38 years, the woman he knew was incapable of raising her voice, incapable of confrontation, incapable of defending herself. This Eleanor was a stranger to him. You have to understand that everything I did was for us. Everything you did was to steal from me. My inheritance, my health, my dignity, my entire life. But it's over. That night, I slept for the first time alone in our marital bed while he went to the guest room. It was symbolic. After 38 years of being the uncomfortable guest in my own house, I had finally reclaimed my territory. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I got ready for myself. I put on my favorite navy blue dress, the one Arthur hated because he said it made me look provincial. I put on makeup like I did when I was young, before he convinced me it was unnecessary vanity. I wore my hair down, the way I liked it, not in the tight bun he considered appropriate for my age. I left the house without telling him where I was going. It was the first time in years I didn't have to report my movements to anyone. I went to Bank of America, where my father had worked for 30 years before he died. I asked the manager to review all accounts associated with my name. When he saw the amount of money involved, he treated me with a respect I hadn't experienced in years. Mrs. Vance, we have properties registered here with a value exceeding $8 million. Are you aware of all these investments? $8 million. I almost fainted. For years I had lived counting pennies for groceries, while Arthur managed a fortune that was legally half mine. I want to open a personal account, I told him, in my name only. Of course. With what initial amount? With half of everything listed under the names of the Vance couple. The manager got nervous. Ma'am, that would require a court order. I have the court order. Patricia had worked fast. The judge had determined that while the case was being resolved, the marital assets would be divided into 2 separate accounts to protect the rights of both parties. When I left the bank, I was no longer Eleanor, the invisible wife. I was Eleanor Vance, owner of $4 million and multiple properties. For the first time in my adult life, I had my own money. My first purchase was ridiculous but deeply satisfying. I walked into Nordstrom and bought the silver bracelet I had been eyeing in the display case for years. I paid for it without looking at the price, enjoying the feeling of buying something simply because I liked it. Then I went to the pharmacy and bought all my real medications. I would no longer have to pretend that vitamins were helping me. I would no longer have to live sick to satisfy Arthur's plan. But the most important thing I did that day was visit Carmen, my former housekeeper. She lived in a modest house on the outskirts of Charleston, taking care of her grandchildren while her daughter worked in a factory. Mrs. Vance, what a surprise, she said, opening the door. How are you? Better than ever, Carmen. I'm here to offer you a job. A job? Did Mr. Arthur send you? No, I'm offering it to you. I want you to be my personal assistant, $4,000 a month with full benefits. Carmen's jaw dropped. It was 3 times what Arthur paid her to clean the house. But Mrs. Vance? What will Mr. Arthur say? Carmen, we are no longer asking Mr. Arthur for his opinion. Do you accept or not? That afternoon, I returned home accompanied by Carmen, who officially arrived as my personal employee, not the cleaning lady. Her first task was to help me change the locks on the house. But Mrs. Vance, she said as the locksmith worked, what if Mr. Arthur gets angry? Carmen, this house belonged to my mother, my grandmother, and the women of my family for 3 generations. Arthur was the guest here, not me. When Arthur arrived that night with cheap flowers and a rehearsed apology, he found that his key no longer opened the door to his own house. He rang the doorbell like any other visitor. Carmen opened the door in her new uniform, an elegant gray dress, nothing like the faded apron Arthur used to make her wear. Good evening, Mr. Vance. Mrs. Vance is waiting for you in the living room. I waited for him, seated in my favorite armchair, the green velvet one he had always hated, but was the spot where my grandmother used to read me stories as a child. In my hands, I held the documents Patricia had prepared, the divorce petition. Eleanor, what is the meaning of this with the locks? It means you don't live here anymore. What do you mean I don't live here? This is my house. This house belonged to my family. You were just my husband. But you aren't anymore. I handed him the divorce papers. When he saw them, he collapsed onto the sofa as if he'd been shot. Eleanor, we can't get divorced. We've been together for 38 years. We've been together for 38 years, but you've spent years planning to get rid of me. The difference is, now I'm getting rid of you first. But the money, the properties, everything we built, everything you built with my money, on my properties, using my name. The difference is, now I know it. And what does Valerie have to do with this? Valerie can have you. In fact, I already spoke with her. Arthur went pale. You spoke with Valerie. Yesterday afternoon, I explained that the money she received every month was half mine. I told her if she wanted to keep receiving anything, she'd have to ask me, not you. Do you know what she said? What? She told me to send you her regards. It was a lie. But seeing the look on Arthur's face as he imagined Valerie abandoning him now that she knew he had no money gave me a satisfaction I hadn't felt in decades. Eleanor, please. We can work this out. We can go to marriage counseling. Marriage counseling? Arthur, you were poisoning me for 2 years. You forged my signature on million-dollar documents. You manipulated our son into believing I was crazy. What are we going to talk about in therapy? But I love you. No, you love my money. You love my house. You love the image of the respectable husband I gave you. But me, the person I am, you never loved her. He sat there staring at the divorce papers as if they were a death sentence. Where am I going to live? Not my problem. With what money? Also, not my problem. Eleanor, you can't do this to me. I stood up from the armchair and looked down at him, from the height that came with knowing I no longer depended on him for anything. Arthur, for 38 years you decided what I could do, what I could say, how I should dress, who I could talk to, when I could go out. For 38 years I lived asking for permission to exist in my own life. Now it's your turn to find out what it feels like to be completely alone. But the neighbors, the family, everyone will think. They will think that a woman finally got tired of being treated like trash and decided to reclaim her dignity. That night, Arthur slept in a motel in North Charleston, the same poor area where we had started our marriage. The irony was perfect. He had returned to exactly where he began, but now I was the one with the economic power he had always craved. I stayed up late, walking through my house in silence, reacquainting myself with every corner as if seeing it for the first time. Without the weight of Arthur's presence, the house breathed differently. The spaces seemed larger, the colors brighter, the air cleaner. For the first time in decades, the silence of my house didn't bring me sadness. It brought me peace. It was the first day of the rest of my life, and for the first time in 38 years, that life belonged completely to me. The final confrontation came 3 weeks later, when Daniel returned from London, accompanied by Valerie. Yes, Arthur had brought his mistress to my house for a family meeting, where they planned to convince me to withdraw the divorce and the lawsuits. The audacity was so grotesque it almost made me laugh. I waited for them in the main living room, dressed in my black two-piece suit, the one I had bought for my mother's funeral, but never wore because Arthur considered it too elegant for a widow. Carmen had prepared coffee in the Sèvres porcelain set I inherited from my grandmother, the one Arthur always kept for special occasions that never arrived. Valerie turned out to be exactly what I had imagined. A 35-year-old woman, bleached blonde, with obvious plastic surgery and expensive clothes that screamed, "kept woman," from one end of King Street to the other. She walked into my house as if she owned it, hanging her Prada bag on my coat rack and looking at the antique furniture with the disdain of someone who considers anything before 1990 to be junk. "Mom," Daniel began in that executive voice he used for difficult presentations. "This is Valerie. She's been very important to Dad during this difficult time." "A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Vance," Valerie said with a fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Arthur has told me so much about you." "I imagine he has," I replied without moving from my armchair, "especially the part where you two planned to put me in a home to take my money." The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Arthur coughed nervously, Daniel adjusted his tie, and Valerie momentarily lost her mask of a refined lady. "Mom," Daniel intervened, "no one wants to put you in a home. We just want what's best for you." "What's best for me?" "Daniel, Do you know how much money you've received from your father in the last 2 years for your flat in London? That's not relevant. $200,000. Money that came from accounts that were half in my name, without my knowledge. I pulled out the bank statements Patricia had obtained. The international transfers were all there, documented with exact dates and amounts. Mom, Dad helped me with the down payment because you knew I was crazy and wouldn't notice. Because you planned from the beginning to steal my inheritance and divide it up before I died. Arthur stood up from the sofa, no longer feigning cordiality. Enough, Eleanor! This is ridiculous! I worked my whole life to build that fortune. With what money did you build your first office? That was 40 years ago. With what money, Arthur? With your savings, but who paid the mortgage on this house for the first 10 years? We both paid. Liar. I paid it with my salary from the library while you were building your career. Who inherited this house? You did, but we improved it. We? You changed it without asking me. You destroyed the original tiles, ripped out my grandmother's plants, turned my mother's sewing room into your private office. I stood and walked to the bookcase where I kept the small safe that Arthur didn't know about, the one my mother gave me before she died, with all the original family documents. This house is valued at $1.5 million according to the current property assessment. It was appraised before you ever came into my life. Everything else, all those properties in Hilton Head, Savannah, Naples, were bought with money from the sale of family land that I inherited. I pulled out the original deeds, yellowed but legal. Arthur went pale, seeing documents whose existence he never knew. Valerie, I said without looking at her, did you know that the money your boyfriend was supporting you with was mine? Ma'am, I didn't know that that I existed? That I had rights? That I was the true owner of everything he showed off to you? Valerie looked to Arthur for support, but he was too busy reading the deeds that proved his financial empire was built on properties that had never belonged to him. Mom, Daniel tried to take control of the situation. We understand that you feel neglected, but we can fix this as a family. We don't need lawyers or courts. Fix it how? By giving me an allowance from my own money? By allowing me to live in my own house? By visiting me on Sundays at the nursing home while you enjoy my inheritance? It wasn't just your inheritance, Arthur exploded. I worked for 38 years to multiply that money. Without me, you would have died poor. Without you, I would have been free for 38 years. Without you, I would have made my own decisions about my money. Without you, I would have lived my life instead of being the shadow of yours. Valerie, who had been quiet, processing the information, suddenly stood up from the sofa. You know what, Arthur? I didn't sign up for this. For what, my love? To be an accomplice in robbing an old woman. It's one thing to be your mistress, it's another thing to be a thief. Arthur shot to his feet as if he'd been electrocuted. Valerie, you don't understand. She's sick. She doesn't know what she's saying. Sick? She seems more lucid than you do to me. Valerie picked up her Prada bag and walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned back to me. Mrs. Vance, you don't know me, and you probably hate me, but I want you to know something. I didn't know about any of this. Arthur told me you died years ago. The door closed behind her with a definitive click. In a matter of seconds, Arthur had lost his mistress, his plan, and his dignity. Look what you did! He screamed at me with a fury he had never shown before. You drove her away! She was the only good thing in my life. If she was the only good thing in your life, then you never had anything good at all. Daniel stood up, visibly uncomfortable. Mom, Dad, this is getting out of control. No, Daniel, this is coming under control for the first time in 38 years. Arthur began pacing like a caged animal. I won't let you do this to me. I'll fight you in court. I'll prove you're insane. You'll what? Bribe the judge like you bribed Dr. Hernandez? How do you know about? I know everything, Arthur. Every bribe, every forged document, every lie you told about my mental health. My lawyer has recordings, witnesses, forensic medical evidence. If you want to fight in court, fine. But you won't be fighting a helpless old woman. You'll be fighting a woman who has better lawyers than you and all the evidence of your crimes. I held up the digital recorder that had been running during the entire conversation. Patricia had taught me that in cases of psychological abuse, spontaneous confessions were the best evidence. Everything you've both said in here has been recorded, including your admission that you forged documents and bribed a doctor. Arthur collapsed onto the sofa, finally understanding that he had lost completely. Daniel, I said to my son, you have a decision to make. You can stay on your father's side and face the legal consequences of being an accomplice to financial fraud. Or you can walk away from all of this and save your career in London. Mom, I never wanted to hurt you, but you did. For 2 years, you helped him plan to have me committed. You received stolen money from my accounts. You manipulated my friends into believing I was crazy. I thought you were really sick. When was the last time you spoke to me for more than 5 minutes, Daniel? When was the last time you asked me how I felt, what I thought, what I needed? How would you possibly know if I was sick or not? Daniel couldn't answer because the answer was obvious. For years, I had become an annoying family obligation, someone to call out of duty and visit out of tradition. You have 24 hours to get out of my house, I told them, my voice calm but firm. After that, all communication will be through our lawyers. Mom, you can't do this. We're your family. My family died the day you both decided I was a nuisance that had to be eliminated. Arthur got up, stumbling like a drunk man. This isn't over, Eleanor. I'm going to get back what's mine. You have nothing to get back, Arthur. It was never yours. I only lent it to you for 38 years because I was foolish enough to believe that marriage meant sharing everything. The loan is now officially revoked. I watched them leave my house, a defeated father and son, carrying the weight of a war they had started but were unable to win. Carmen appeared from the kitchen, where she had been waiting discreetly. Mrs. Vance, are you all right? Yes, Carmen. For the first time in 38 years, I am perfectly fine. That night, I took a bubble bath in the pink marble tub that had been my grandmother's. I poured myself a glass of the French wine Arthur kept for special occasions, and that I had never tasted. I put on a Nina Simone record on the stereo he only ever used for his financial news. For the first time since I was a girl, my house truly felt like my own. The war was over, and for the first time in my life, I had won. I thought that after the final confrontation, it was all over. How naive I was. Desperate men are capable of cruelties that a decent woman cannot even imagine. For 3 weeks, I lived in a peace I believed was permanent. I woke up when I wanted, had breakfast in the courtyard among the geraniums I had replanted, read novels by Alice Walker in the afternoons, and for the first time in decades, I felt in control of my time and my space. Carmen had moved into the house as my companion, not my employee, and our morning conversations restored the feeling that I existed as a person, not a shadow. Patricia visited me regularly to update me on the legal process. Everything was going in our favor. Arthur had hired a second-rate lawyer who had no idea how to handle a case of this magnitude. The evidence was overwhelming. The witnesses were solid, and my psychiatric evaluation had confirmed I was in perfect mental condition. In another 2 months, we'll have the final judgment, Patricia assured me during one of our meetings. Your properties will be entirely in your name. He will have to return all the money he illegally withdrew, and he will very likely face criminal charges for forgery and abuse. It was too good to be true, and it was. The first blow came on a Tuesday morning when Carmen returned from the Charleston City Market with a worried look on her face. Mrs. Vance, people at the market are asking me strange things. What kind of things? They're asking if it's true that you've lost your mind and are stealing Mr. Arthur's money. If it's true you kicked him out of the house at gunpoint. If it's true you have Alzheimer's and that's why you don't recognize your own family. I felt a chill run down my spine. Who is saying these things? I don't know, ma'am, but the whole neighborhood is talking about it. Mrs. Gable from the bakery told me that someone has been going from house to house, telling people that you're very sick, and that lawyers are manipulating you to steal your son's inheritance. Arthur had started a smear campaign. He couldn't win in court, so he had decided to destroy my social reputation. In a traditional, tight-knit community like ours, gossip is more powerful than any court ruling. The second blow came that same afternoon when my gynecologist, Dr. Morales, called me, concerned. Mrs. Vance, I need to see you urgently. Someone came to my office asking questions about your medical history. In his office, Dr. Morales showed me a folder with official-looking documents. Someone is investigating all your medical records from the last 5 years. They specifically requested information about psychiatric treatments, dementia medications, and episodes of mental confusion. Doctor, you know I've never had any mental health problems. I know that perfectly well. That's why I'm worried. Whoever is doing this has access to significant legal resources. This is not an amateur investigation. The third blow, the most devastating one, arrived on Friday when Daniel appeared at my door, accompanied by an elegant woman who introduced herself as Dr. Beatrice Collins, a psychiatrist specializing in geriatric disorders. Mom, we're here because we're very worried, Daniel said in that voice he had perfected to sound like a devoted son. We've received reports that you've been exhibiting erratic behavior. Reports from whom? From the neighbors, from the staff at the bank, from shopkeepers in the neighborhood. They say you've been spending money irrationally, that you talk to yourself, that sometimes you don't recognize people you've known for years. Dr. Collins opened a briefcase full of documents. Mrs. Vance, I am a forensic psychiatrist. I've been hired by your family to evaluate your mental capacity due to the concerns that have arisen about your recent behavior. I didn't ask for any evaluation. It's not necessary for you to request it, she explained in a professional yet condescending tone. When there are signs of cognitive decline that put the family's assets at risk, direct relatives can request a mandatory judicial evaluation. She showed me an order signed by a different judge than the one handling my divorce case. A family court judge who had determined there was probable cause to doubt my mental competence. This is impossible, I said. My psychiatrist evaluated me 2 weeks ago and confirmed that I'm perfectly fine. Yes, we've reviewed that evaluation, Dr. Collins replied. But there are inconsistencies. The doctor who evaluated you is not certified for forensic cases. Furthermore, new evidence has emerged. Daniel took out his phone and showed me a video recording. It was me at the city market, seemingly talking to myself while buying vegetables. What the video didn't show was that I was on the phone using a Bluetooth earpiece, consulting with Carmen about what we needed for dinner. Mom, this is what I mean. The vendors say you come to the market talking to people who aren't there. There were more videos. Me at the bank, looking confused, asking for information about accounts I didn't remember opening. What they didn't show was that I was asking about the fraudulent accounts Arthur had opened in my name, trying to understand the full scope of his theft. We also have this, Dr. Collins added, showing me photographs of my house. They showed the changed locks, the rearranged furniture, the new plants in the courtyard. Obsessive-compulsive behavior typical of early-onset dementia, changing locks for no apparent reason, constantly moving furniture, compulsively buying plants. Every normal action I had taken to reclaim my house had been documented and twisted into evidence of mental illness. Arthur had been following me, photographing me, recording me for weeks, building a case to prove I was insane. Mrs. Vance, Dr. Collins continued, we're going to need you to come with us for a more comprehensive evaluation at the Low Country Behavioral Health Center. Now, it's for the best. The longer you go without treatment, the more your condition could deteriorate. I am not going to any psychiatric hospital. Daniel approached with that perfected look of feigned concern. Mom, please. It's just for a few days, to rule out any serious problems. A few days? That would turn into months, maybe years. Once I was committed, Arthur could present evidence of my mental incapacity to the judge and regain control of all the assets. I'm not going, I repeated. Dr. Collins sighed as if she had expected that response. Mrs. Vance, I have a court order for an involuntary commitment if you refuse necessary medical treatment. She pulled out another document. An order for forced psychiatric commitment, signed by the same judge who had ordered my evaluation. In that moment, I understood the full extent of the plan. Arthur hadn't been wasting time during these weeks of apparent defeat. He had been building an entirely new case, using the mental health system to do what he couldn't achieve through the traditional legal system. If they took me to the psychiatric hospital, I would lose everything. Once declared mentally incompetent, Arthur would regain management of my assets as my responsible spouse. The divorce would be nullified because a mentally incompetent person cannot consent to divorce. All the bank accounts would return to his control. And the worst part? In the U.S., Getting out of a psychiatric hospital after being involuntarily committed is nearly impossible, especially for a 62-year-old woman with no family to support her. "Carmen," I yelled toward the kitchen. "Call Patricia, now." "Mom, don't make this harder," Daniel said, reaching as if to take my arm. "Don't touch me." My shout was so loud that even Dr. Collins flinched. In that instant, something inside me switched on. It wasn't panic or despair. It was the absolute clarity of someone who finally understands they are fighting for their life. "You are not taking me anywhere," I told them, my voice calm but firm. "And if you try to touch me, I will scream until every neighbor on this street comes out to see what's happening." "Mom, please." "Daniel, listen to me very carefully. You're 30 years old. Your life is in London, far away from here. Do you really want to spend the next few years in American courts fighting over a blood-stained inheritance? Do you really want everyone in your professional circle in London to know you had your own mother committed to a psychiatric hospital to steal her money?" I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Arthur had promised him easy money, but Daniel wasn't stupid. He knew this plan could destroy his international career if it went wrong. "Dr. Collins," I said, without taking my eyes off my son, "I hope you are aware that this entire conversation is being recorded by the security cameras I had installed last week. It was a lie, but it worked." The doctor glanced toward the corners of the ceiling as if expecting to see cameras. "And I hope you also know that my lawyer has copies of every document proving the financial fraud that prompted this case. If anything happens to me, if I mysteriously disappear into a psychiatric hospital, she has instructions to send everything to the media." The silence that followed was the most important of my life. In those seconds, Daniel had to decide if he was the son his father had manipulated or the adult man who had his own life to protect. "Dr. Collins," he said finally, "I think we need more time to assess the situation." The woman looked at him with professional disapproval. "Mr. Vance, the court order is clear." "The court order can wait 24 hours, Daniel interrupted. "I need to consult with my own lawyers before we proceed." It wasn't a victory, but it was a truce. And sometimes, 24 hours is enough to change the course of a war. After they left, I sat in my kitchen, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt real fear. Not fear of losing money or property, fear of losing my freedom, my identity, my right to exist as a competent person. But I also felt something else. The absolute determination of a woman who had survived 62 years in this world and had no intention of giving up now. Carmen served me chamomile tea with trembling hands. "Mrs. Vance, what are we going to do?" "We're going to fight, Carmen, with everything we have." I didn't sleep that night. Not from fear, from strategy. If Arthur wanted to play dirty, he was about to find out that the invisible woman had learned a few tricks during 38 years of watching from the shadows. And the endgame was just beginning. The next 24 hours were the most intense of my life. Patricia arrived at my house at 6 in the morning with a full team. Another lawyer specializing in psychiatric law, a private investigator, and an independent forensic psychiatrist who had worked on similar cases. "Eleanor," Patricia said as she reviewed the documents Daniel had left, "this is more serious than we thought. Your ex-husband hired some very professional people, but they made one mistake." "What was that?" "They were in too much of a hurry. When someone wants to fabricate evidence of mental illness, they need months to build a credible pattern. They tried to do it in weeks." The private investigator, an older man named Mr. Vega, had been working all night. "Mrs. Vance, we found something interesting. The Dr. Collins who visited you yesterday is not licensed as a forensic psychiatrist by the South Carolina Medical Board. She is a psychiatrist, yes, but she specializes in children, not geriatrics." "What does that mean?" "It means she's not qualified to perform the evaluation she claimed she was there for. And more importantly, we found her financial records. She received a $15,000 wire transfer from an account associated with your ex-husband 3 days before visiting you." Patricia smiled with the satisfaction of someone who has just found the thread that unravels the entire web of lies. "We have bribery of an expert witness. That invalidates her entire evaluation. But we're going to go further." Throughout the day, Patricia's team worked like a legal war machine. They obtained the security footage from the city market that clearly showed I was talking on the phone, not to myself. They got a statement from the bank manager confirming that all my questions were logical and appropriate. They documented every one of my actions over the past few weeks, proving that everything had a rational explanation, but Carmen made the most important discovery. "Mrs. Vance," she said that afternoon, her eyes shining with excitement, "do you remember Mrs. Gable from the bakery? The one who told me someone was spreading gossip about you?" "Yes." Well, it turns out she recognized the man. It was Rick, the guy who runs the local car service. And Mrs. Gable says Rick has owed Mr. Arthur money for years. Carmen had done what no private investigator could have. She used the neighborhood gossip network to trace the source of the smear campaign. Within hours, we had identified 5 people who had been spreading rumors about my mental health in exchange for Arthur forgiving their debts or paying them small amounts of cash. "This is criminal conspiracy," Patricia explained to me. "Not just to commit fraud, but for unlawful deprivation of liberty. If they had succeeded in having you committed, your ex-husband could face federal charges." At 6 o'clock that evening, when Daniel arrived again, accompanied by the fake Dr. Collins, we were waiting for them with a surprise. "Mr. Vance," Patricia said from the living room, "I'm Patricia Martinez, your mother's attorney. Before you proceed with any commitment, you need to know that we have filed a criminal complaint against you, against Arthur Vance, and against the woman posing as a forensic psychiatrist." Dr. Collins's face went white. "I am a board-certified psychiatrist. In pediatrics, yes. But you have no certification for forensic evaluations of senior citizens, and you received $15,000 from Arthur Vance to falsify a diagnosis." Daniel turned pale. "I don't know what you're talking about. We're talking about the witnesses you hired to spread rumors about your mother's mental health. We're talking about the edited video recordings to make her look as if she has dementia. We're talking about bribery, falsification of medical documents, and conspiracy to commit unlawful imprisonment." Patricia handed Daniel a thick folder. "These are all the documents we've filed with the district attorney's office. Your mother will not be going to any psychiatric hospital, but you 3 will be going to criminal court." "Dr. Collins," my lawyer said to the woman who was still standing in my living room like a statue, "you have 5 minutes to leave this house before I call the police." The woman practically ran out, dropping some of her fake documents in the process. Daniel stood there, staring at the folder as if it contained his death sentence. "Mom?" he said, his voice no longer that of a successful executive, but of a scared child. "I didn't know Dad had taken it this far. You didn't know he was having me followed? You didn't know he had hired people to spread lies about me? You didn't know he had bribed a fake psychiatrist? I knew Dad was desperate, but I thought he just wanted to get some of the money back. Daniel, this was never just about the money. This was about destroying me completely, erasing my existence, my identity, my right to live as a free person." He sat down on the sofa, and for the first time since he was a little boy, I saw him cry. "Mom, forgive me. I didn't know what I'd gotten into until it was too late." "Too late for what?" "To stop it. When I realized what was really happening, I had already signed documents. I'd already given statements. If I backed out, Dad threatened to say that I was the one who came up with the whole plan. There it was. The truth. Daniel wasn't an evil conspirator. He was a weak man who had been manipulated by his father and then blackmailed into continuing. "What do you want to do now?" I asked him. "I want to help you. I want to testify against Dad. I want to fix whatever can be fixed." Patricia intervened. "If Mr. Vance cooperates fully with the investigation, we can negotiate for immunity in exchange for his testimony." Daniel nodded desperately. "Yes, everything. I'll tell you everything." And that's how we got the final piece of the puzzle. Daniel gave us access to all his communications with Arthur, explained the plan from the beginning, and provided evidence of the bribes and forgeries. 3 days later, Arthur was arrested at his motel in North Charleston. The charges included financial fraud, forgery, bribery, and conspiracy to commit unlawful imprisonment. I was in my courtyard watering my geraniums when Patricia called to give me the news. "Eleanor, he's in custody." The judge denied bail, considering him a flight risk and a threat to intimidate witnesses. I hung up the phone and continued watering my plants. I didn't feel joy or revenge or satisfaction, just a deep peace, like when a long storm finally ends and the sun comes out. 6 months later, I moved out of the house in the South of Broad neighborhood, not because I was forced to, but because I decided it was time to write a completely new chapter of my life. I sold the house for $1.5 million and bought a modern condo in downtown Charleston, near Patricia's office, near art galleries, near coffee shops where I could sit and read in the afternoons. Daniel returned to London after testifying at the trial. Our relationship was never the same, but there was no longer hatred between us. Just a mutual sadness for all the lost time and a small hope that one day we could build something new on the ruins of what we had been. Arthur was sentenced to 8 years in prison. During the trial, he presented himself as a broken man who had acted out of desperation, but I no longer felt anything for him. Not love, not hate, not pity. It was as if he had been the main character in a nightmare from which I had finally awakened. With the money from the sale of the house and the recovery of all my assets, I created the Eleanor Vance Foundation for at-risk senior women. We help women over 50 who are being financially or psychologically abused by their families. Every month, we receive dozens of cases similar to mine. Invisible women who have been stripped of everything by men who promised to love them forever. Carmen became the chief operating officer of the foundation. It turned out she had a natural talent for business that no one, not even herself, had ever discovered during her years cleaning other people's houses. Today, 2 years after this story began, I wake up every morning in my light-filled condo. I have breakfast on the terrace, looking out at the live oak trees of downtown Charleston. I read the entire newspaper, not just the pages someone else deems appropriate for me. I decide what clothes to wear without asking anyone if I look appropriate for my age. On Thursdays, I go to a painting class at a studio in the French Quarter. On Saturdays, I have lunch with Patricia, who has become more of a friend than a lawyer. On Sundays, I visit the women at the foundation, listening to stories that remind me where I came from and why it's worth continuing to fight. A month ago, I met Robert, a 65-year-old widower who also takes the painting class. We've been out to dinner 3 times. I don't know if it will turn into anything serious, and honestly, I don't care. For the first time in my life, I'm getting to know someone as Eleanor, not as someone's wife or someone's mother. Sometimes, when I walk through the streets of downtown Charleston, I remember the woman I was for 38 years. That invisible woman who asked for permission to exist, who lived apologizing for taking up space in the world, who believed her value depended on how useful she was to other people. And then I look at my reflection in a window or a mirror, and I see the woman I am now. A free woman, in charge of her time, her money, her decisions. A woman who learned that it's never too late to take your life back, that you're never too old to start over, that you're never too broken to put yourself back together, but this time, in your own way. The invisible woman had become completely visible. But more importantly, she had learned to see herself. Have you ever experienced something similar? Or do you know someone who has gone through a similar situation? Tell me in the comments. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Maybe this message will reach someone who needs to hear it. Someone who still believes it's too late to change their life. Someone who needs to be reminded that it is never, ever too late to reclaim your power.